All right. Good morning, everyone. Let's see. Brian, can I get a thumbs up if my volume's coming through? All right, great. Welcome, everyone, to the third meeting of the Whitehead Reading Group. We are just thrilled to have so many people joining us. At last count, we have 165 people from all over the world. And so welcome, welcome, welcome. It's just really thrilling. We are going to be recording today's session, and as last session, it'll be up on the WRP website, and we'll send you out a link sometime this next week with a recap and also some food for thought for our next reading. And even though we're recording, we still hope we can have a free and wide-ranging conversation and that each of you will be able to participate as you like. So just a reintroduction, I'm Brianne Donaldson. I currently teach in the Religious Studies program and Philosophy department at the University of California, Irvine, and I'm grateful to them for co-sponsoring this. And I was just really looking for an opportunity to engage with Whitehead's work again, and was so glad that Joe and Brian were willing to come into the fray, and now all of you joining from all the corners of the world. So just gratitude all the way around. Let's turn it over to Brian for any announcements. And Brian, I just wanted to give a little, I got my copy. So I'm helping you to give your plug.
Nice.
It is heavy and weighty, and I'm already about 30 pages into it. So good work, both of you, really great.
Excellent. Thank you, Brianne, for that transition. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Henning. I'm professor of philosophy and environmental studies at Gonzaga University in Washington State in the US. And I'm also the director of research at WRP and executive editor of the edition. Just a couple of announcements, really the same as we've had. Before I do that, though, it might be a good idea, if you haven't already, to open up the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom window, just so that we can share information with you. I'm going to post a couple of links in the chat, which you might consider opening and referring to at a later date. So the first one is about how to purchase the second volume of the critical edition, because it's only recently been published. There's a 30% discount code on the website, so take a look at that. If you are attached to a university or college that is still purchasing physical paper books, which I hope you are, then I would encourage you to send a note to your librarian and ask them to consider buying a copy of the first two volumes of the edition for your university's library. The second link I'm posting there is about a virtual conference that we'll be hosting, a free conference in September on the second volume of the critical edition. So we're hoping you'll do what Brianne did, which is to buy your copy, start reading through it, and then come to the conference and maybe also consider submitting a paper to be presented. We're experimenting with this virtual conference idea. Obviously, that creates some opportunities for people to participate who might not otherwise be able to. So look at the call for papers, which is the third link that we posted down there. Consider getting the book and consider submitting a paper proposal for that conference. My suggestion as a starting place, and I think we all do this naturally, but as you read through the 400 or 500 pages worth of great material, is obviously think about how it relates to what you've already been doing, what you've been writing out about, thinking about how does it confirm or change what it is that you already know or thought you knew about Whitehead's work, and then pitch a paper idea, right, about what that reveals for you. So those are the announcements that I have. Joe, have I forgotten anything?
I don't think so. I mean, except that you already posted the link to the videos for people who want to see the recordings. We've got the first one up on our newly created YouTube channel, which includes, I've just been putting up a bunch of old conference videos for people who are interested in that, especially the past 3 conferences that the WRP has done. It's all up on the web now on YouTube.
Before you give some background, Joe, I wanted to say, as I got into this second critical edition, it was just pretty fascinating because it was interesting to see the editorial tasks of how you took student notes and how you kind of translated them into what was unclear and how did you deal with when they were doodling in the margins and when they were adding in little words. And also, I don't know for any of you, you kind of ranked the note takers, like who was the best note taker, who was the most thorough. And I started thinking about my own note taking, because there's always these thoughts like, don't take any notes, or I'm like it has to go kind of through my brain and out the hands and into the, and I'm a mad note taker. And I just thought, oh, I would have been, Joe and Brian would have said I was a good note taker, sometimes word for word quotes. Yeah, so anyway, I just thought it was just so interesting to think about approaching Whitehead's work through students, which all of us I'm sure have been in lectures where we're taking notes and then we would be the historians. So it's a pretty fascinating read. Joe, you're going to give us a little background and context for this reading, such as there is, and then we'll talk a little bit about how our session's going to go. So rock it.
Yeah, so hi again, everybody. For those of you who are here for the first few meetings, you'll know that as WRP's archivist who cataloged most of this stuff, I've been trying to provide everyone with a little bit of context at the beginning of each of these sessions about the time and place and circumstances in which Whitehead wrote what he wrote, but unfortunately in this case, there really isn't much in the way of context that I can give because there's just a dearth of clues that might point us to a year or an occasion for this address. About the only thing that we can be pretty sure about in terms of the context is that Whitehead delivered this address in America. The best indicator of that is probably on page 2, where he says that, quote, "Another song brings in America in a complimentary fashion, so I will quote a verse." He also talks of England in various places in a way suggesting that it is elsewhere, i.e. not where he is speaking. And he also recalls the beginning of World War I, so it seems safe to assume that he was delivering this address in America. And there's also one other possible clue about the rough date of this address, which I almost hesitate to mention because it's very uncertain. But I do find it interesting that at the bottom of page 2, he had written, "As the generations pass in 70 years, behavior patterns alter," but he crossed out 70 and wrote 80. And you would think that if Whitehead was talking about generations of humanity in general, then it seems like a strange thing to bother changing. Since the average age of a generation doesn't tend to shift much. So given this, it may be possible that Whitehead was referring to his own rough age here, which might in turn suggest that he was about 70 when he originally wrote it and was about 80 when he was revising it. But of course, I wouldn't want to bet money on any of that because it's a very slender and uncertain basis for trying to date this thing. So that's about all that I can say for context, unfortunately. This particular essay remains a bit of a mystery on that score, at least for the moment. And I will just say that if anyone here today happened to notice anything that I might have missed that might help us to identify the time or place where this address was delivered, please don't stay quiet. Do let me know either today during the discussion or by email if you prefer, because I'll take all the help I can get. And I'd love if we could figure out a little bit more about this thing. But that's kind of all I've got to say for context to start us off. I promise I'll have more next time for the next thing.
Just as a reminder, in case you weren't here in previous sessions, Joe, do you want to briefly talk about how we came to have this in the Whitehead papers, just so there's the context of how it came to us recently, relatively?
Yeah, I mean, basically after the publication of the first volume of the critical edition, Whitehead's grandson, who we'd been in contact with anyway in order to get his blessing on publishing his grandfather's work, said, well, hey, I've actually got this collection of papers that I've been holding on to, kind of not knowing what to do with, and decided to send it our way. And in there was about, I think, after everything was cataloged, it was about 600 plus separate items. And a lot of that is like he got a lot of 80th birthday letters. It's a lot of personal things that don't really have much to tell us about Whitehead's philosophy. But in there, there were these 3 addresses that we're looking at in turn, this is one of the more exciting things because I don't think that anyone had seen this before, anyone knew it existed. So it's a new piece of work for everyone to look at.
Great. So let's see, Brian or Joe, if Whitehead died in 1947 and he was 80, maybe 80, when it was edited, then this would have put it at what point?
Around 41. I mean, it would have been, he retired from Harvard in 1937. And yeah, so this would have been around 39, 40-ish, we think, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So maybe toward the later part, some of the last work that he was putting out, at least in its revised state.
Yes.
All right. Well, we are going to get into our participant time. We're going to do something a bit similar to last time. We are going to, for participant engagement, we're going to do 2 rounds of questions. The first one will start now in just a couple minutes, and then around maybe 10 till, so in about 35, 40 minutes, we'll do a second round. I'm going to post the question here in just a second, but remember that we're doing enter key is lava. So I'm going to give you a question, and then I'll put a timer on for about 4 minutes for you to take a look and to write your answer in the chat. But you're not going to hit enter because that key is hot, until I tell you to hit enter. And then we'll all hit enter at the same time. All of the answers will populate, and we'll start to kind of go through them, go through as many as we can in the 40 minutes, and then we'll do a second round. In the second round, we'll have a question as well as a wildcard option so that you can ask anything you want. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see the question, and I'll also put it in the chat. So our question 1, is there a sentence that helps you to understand or that points you to the role of religion as it's related to freedom and order? Again, I'm going to put a timer on for about 4 minutes for you all to take up this question. You'll type out your answer into the chat box, and if there's a page, go ahead and you can add that if you've got it ready to hand. At the end of the 4 minutes, I'll let us know that we're at the end of time, and then we'll all hit enter together so that those populate and we can take a look at them as a group. All right, let's get started with our time. In just a moment, I'll also put this question into the chat. Let's start with 4 minutes and we'll go now. All right, see you in a few. If you're just joining, we've got 4-minute timer on and a question in the chat that you are welcome to weigh in. Just hold your answer in the chat until I ask you to hit enter. have about a minute left to continue, and don't feel rushed. You can always add it in later. All right, we are at 4 minutes. So as you are ready, you can go ahead and start to hit enter and we'll begin to populate this chat. I'm going to unshare and we'll get into it. So our opening question for question round 1 is there a sentence that helps you understand or points to the role of religion as related to freedom and order? Maynard Moore says, yes, I'm a United Methodist clergy and I was intrigued by his reference to the labor rights in Britain who are, quote, who are all Methodists, end quote. At the beginning of the 20th century in America, the social gospel was emerging with Methodists in leadership, and the Methodist social creed was even precedent, I'm not quite sure, to President Roosevelt, somehow connected to President Roosevelt. His driving concern was the issue of labor rights and in the industrializing US. Good, so we're kind of trying to see if there was a connection here with the social gospel movement and how it's impacting US attitudes. Eric Elder says, apart from the aim beyond matter of fact, there is sterility. This is page 16. This, of course, reminds me too of Whitehead's desire to correct the position of vacuous reality. Apart from the aim beyond matter of fact, there is sterility. Let's think about this one too. Brian Henning says the same exact thing. The quote goes on, such aim introduces ideals, and ideals spell religion. Also, religion is dangerous. It may stabilize ideas which have become obsolete. So we've got two. All right, we're starting to see some themes that we're going to come to back in a second. Let's just read a few more. Juan Ferret says, for this reason, the intrusion of morals is fatal to humor. Juan, if you would want to unmute your mic for a second, I'd love to just hear a word on this one while I go through a couple more. Damien Gedry says, same thing here. Religion is dangerous. It may stabilize ideals that have become obsolete. This statement seems so obvious, but until someone says it, it's not available for open discussion. Damien likes this sentence. Joe Petek says, the dogmas of religion are the products of wit. The habits of religion result from the deep-rooted emotions of humor. So here we've got another overlap here with Juan's point. And if you all are wanting to follow along, you can see I'm just going right down the chat after my question. Kirk Weigand says from page 4, the dogmas of religion are the products of wit. Here we have it again, the deep-rooted emotions of humor. So we can see two questions we're going to be taking up here in just a minute. So Juan, hold that thought, and it looks like others are in league with you. Adrian Ivakiv, hopefully that's close to your given name. A composite sentence, looking at page 17, freedom requires order and requires religion. An ideal springs from understandable order. The requisite understanding must be in our very bones. And it looks like Fala is also touching on this page 17. Let's just do a few more and then we'll open it up for conversation. Lin De Jong says that from page 4, similar, the dogmas of religion of the products of wit. The habits of religion result from the deep-rooted emotions of literature. Bonnie Rambob says from page 15, religion, by this word as used here, what is meant is the sense of perfection, the glimpse of that ideal, and the aim at it. Miriam Bender is looking on page 41. Whitehead, she says, goes from morality to religion, to ideals, to imperatives, and then the statement on page 41, quote, in such a case, morality, a mere expression of a universal categorical imperative, so in such a case, ethics and aesthetics are utterly separate topics. This resonated, including the goal of recreating reciprocity. I'm gonna just go down here to Richard Kuhl. The question reminded me of the ending of chapter 1 and the aims of education. And here we go, this quote. The essence of education is that it be religious. Pray, what is religious education? A religious education is an education which inculcates duty and reverence. Maybe we have a little overlap with Miriam's thoughts here. Duty arises from our potential control over the course of events. Where attainable knowledge could have changed the issue, ignorance has the guilt of vice. And the foundation of reverence is this perception, that the present holds within itself the complete sum of existence, backwards and forwards, that whole amplitude of time, which is eternity. All right, I'm going to pause here. So Stephanie, you're on deck. It looks like we have a few thoughts, and I think it would be good for us to maybe think through a couple of these quotes and try to put them into our own words or context. So I want to start with, actually, we can start anywhere, but I'm curious, we've all been listening and we've heard some overlapping thoughts. So I'd love for someone who is picking up on some of these connections to just pull up one of these quotes. We'll get it on the screen and we'll try to just locate it in context. A reminder of how this works, depending on the version of Zoom you have, we are all muted, but Brian as moderator can unmute us. And to raise your hand and get in the queue, there are two ways to do it. If you have the earlier version, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a sign that says participants. And if you click on that, it'll give you a little pop-up box where you'll see an option of raising your hand. If you have a newer version of Zoom, you'll see a reactions button at the bottom, and there you'll see a hand raising icon. So as you're ready, go ahead and raise your digital hand. Brian will start us with a cue, and we can pick up any of these ideas that have been raised by our colleagues in the chat box in trying to say, what is the relationship between religion and freedom and order?
And it also looks like, not quite, I can almost see all of your pictures. I should also be able to see you if you're having trouble figuring out where the raising hand is. If you do this a lot, I think I probably will be able to see you. And so do that too if you get stuck. It looks like we have a first question or comment from Juan. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. Well, I want to just simply, first of all, thank you, Brian and Brianne and Joseph for getting us all together. This is just fantastic for me. So I would like to just begin by saying that I was not looking forward to this essay necessarily, but once I started reading, I really got into it. I love the initial distinction between humor and wit. Humor, the more connected to our ancestral roots and experience, and wit, maybe more the abstracted element, and then imagination comes in and joins it as kind of like the glue. So my quote that I put in there, and Brianne stopped and smiled, I appreciate it, because in a sense, it makes me smile too. And that's because in a sense, I think we often forget what the process of abstraction is, fundamentally rooted in the experience that oftentimes comes with the play that humor gives us. And wit is then creating abstractions from it and structures, which eventually maybe derive into morals and then eventually into religious practices. But I think that's when morals come in. Once you abstract it and plop it into a set of experiences that humans may have, it destroys this fundamental element of play. And I love whoever it was, I don't remember, who connected to the aims of education, because and it's similarly in the Science in the Modern World toward the end, in Requisites for Social Progress. I feel very strongly that Whitehead is trying to make a point that this is not only a problem of the intellect, but a harmful component of our social practice, systemic practices that hurt the equity of this world. And I could go into a longer version, but for the sake of the conversation, I'll stop.
Juan, was the last part of that sentence that the ideals affect the equity of this world? You broke up right as you were saying it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that I felt, and we had a reading group that recently finished reading together here in El Paso, Texas. And it's a bunch of interdisciplinary folks who are not philosophers. So it was a way to introduce them to Whitehead and process philosophy. And just for context, I used to be in the University of Texas at El Paso, but now I run a nonprofit that works with the community to create social programs. And our aim is to bring the academics into the community and create really impactful projects. That's the succinct version. So what I said is that I think Whitehead was pointing to this problem of disconnection, misplaced concreteness, but now in the context of play or humor, and that religion can come in, doesn't have to, but can come in and displace that important process of each individual, each of us abstracting, and therefore taking away our empowerment through education or empowerment through our social components, therefore preventing equity from really being at play.
Thank you. I just am noticing here that Lydia York is making a point. This is just toward the bottom, but in the early pages, the Victorian nursery rhyme, nursery freedoms reflect white masculine order and resentments about modern moralities. So I was kind of thinking if there was maybe some resonance there with Juan's point about equity. Brian, I'll turn it back over to you.
Lynn, feel free to unmute yourself. And Juan, I'm going to put your hand down. And if you still had a comment you wanted to make, feel free to put it back up.
I really appreciated Juan's connection with humor to play. And I think that is the most current theory of humor in the philosophy of humor. And it made me understand why Whitehead began with Edward Lear and the Lear's Book of Nonsense and his playfulness as a child. And I thought, this is. I don't know that Whitehead actually consciously realized that he was making that point, but I think it is embedded in his work that humor has to do with playfulness and what we all inherit as humans. And then when you start intellectualizing it, then we arrive at wit.
Thank you for that, Lynn. That was a really great point. I'm going to just let that rest for a second in case anybody wants to join in on that before we move to Eric. If you wanted to share more on Lynn's point, feel free to pop your hand up or make a comment in the chat. Thank you, Lynn. That was a good point.
May I just add one quick
Please.
fact? I just recently discovered this morning that my all-time favorite book about play has been republished. It was written in 1938 by a Dutch historian, Johan Huizinga, and it is called Homo Ludens, how humans evolved through play. And it is now available in print again. Ta-da!
Feel free to, if you can have a link to it, feel free to pop it in the chat if people are interested. Eric, feel free to take yourself off mute, and then I'm going to move to Adrian's comment in the chat box.
Well, thank you. I think building off of something that Lynn said, and maybe actually in slight disagreement with Juan, I think that the concept of humor here is and I'm sure I'm not saying anything novel that hasn't crossed people's minds, but I think that it's far deeper than what we typically think of humor today. I think that I read his meaning of humor to be something like a thread that connects the individual to the broader society in which that individual lives. It's well, in a Whiteheadian sense, it's a feeling, and I think that given his initial definition of what humor is, between pages, between pages 3 and 4, I think, as a long unconscious association of emotion and habit that has persisted during uncounted ages in those continuous threads of existence from which we originate. I think that the idea of morality is actually embedded in humor rather than embedded in wit. Wit would be dogma, which is distinctly, in some ways, opposed to morality. So yeah, I mean, I think that's my reflection on that.
That's useful, Eric. And your comments and Juan's in this conversation is reminding me that we always have this challenge with Whitehead. He uses words that we use every day, and sometimes he's using it in that way, but other times he's and almost always, right, when he's using them as a semi-technical term, he's also using them in these strangely broad ways, right? And so the example of from Rudiger in the chat box that it's humor which pushes certain species of birds to yearly migration is just pointing to just how broadly he's using this concept and how we can relate it to what other people are doing with humor, more commonly conceived, but he's using it as a as a philosophical concept in his typically sort of very, very broad way. And so it makes it challenging to both relate it to others and then see what exactly is he trying to say by use of this term and its contrast with wit. Before I take Joe's comment, I'd really like either Adrian, if you would like to, feel free to take yourself off mute, or I can read it for you. So go ahead.
Sure. So I guess I'm trying to put the wit humor dyad into the context of Whitehead's other dyads or triads, as it were. And to me, it's fairly clear that humor is close to this sense of causal efficacy, this kind of intuited sense of the world in its wholeness, whereas wit requires that sort of, just the facts as we see them approach to the world, and then distinguishing one thing from another. And then the role that symbolic reference plays as a kind of synthesis of those two forms of perception would seem to be similar to the role that in this piece Whitehead provides to the imagination. Although, I'm kind of wishing that he wrote more about imagination, because it's potentially a really rich topic, and I'm wondering what other people think of his use of imagination in this particular article.
I can already see a wonderful article appearing, Adrian. I mean, you've got to write this article about relating these new concepts that he's using here to the ones that we know well from the rest of the system. So send it to Process Studies so we can all read it. Luke, did you want to jump in at all? I know that you were sort of seconding Adrian's point. I just want to give you a space if you're interested.
Nothing right now. I'm working on it. Thanks, though.
Absolutely. Eric, did you want to get back in? I know you had your hand up still before, but I wasn't sure if that was lingering. Okay, Joe, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to point out, I think other people have already been saying it, Eric did, and then also in the chat about this different sense of the word humor than we might normally think of it today. And Benjamin Snyder saying in the stat, I took humor in an older sense to mean something like a bodily mood. I mean, I agree with all that. But also, I was really interested, I guess, to maybe just complicate the situation further, but there's this sort of key line, I think, on, I guess this is page 4, but I'll just put it in the chat. It is evident that order will be closely associated with the prevalent humor of the society concerned, and that freedom will be claimed for the prevalent scatter of its wit. And I thought that that was interesting, considering that if I had just read that completely out of context, I thought, like, did he mix it up? Did he put them in the wrong order? Because I think that my intuition would have put it the other way around. And I was wondering if other people might agree with that or had thoughts about that idea, because you would normally think how we describe these things, that wit, if it's this more conscious thing, that it might be more associated with order, and if, you know, presentational immediacy, if the more baseline primordial thing might be more associated with humor. But I thought that was pretty interesting.
Eric is giving you a thumbs up, so I take that as promising. Jessica, did you want to contribute on this line? And then I think Brianne might want to push us forward. Am I right, Brianne?
Yeah, Brian, can you just show the page of what you're on right now? Just what page
Oh, I
number
thought I
is
was.
this?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is 4.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. Jessica.
Thank you. And just to echo what people are saying, thanks again for setting this up. It's lovely. Just to go with what Joe was saying, I'm very new to reading Whitehead's work. I'm coming at it from a different place. And I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like I'm kind of getting close to understanding some of his, relationships. And I thought the same thing. I thought, oh, I guess I don't understand it, because I would have thought, even as this conversation has gone on, thinking about this presentational immediacy versus the causal efficacy, I would have put freedom and order along the different lines than he did. And so I had to reread that sentence several times and kind of draw the lines. And just to go along with that, there's a great sentence. It is humorous to want a summer holiday. It is witty to secure the birth. And to me, again, using these questions of freedom and order and how we'd line them up, to me, the first one does sound the more free. And the second one, the order, you have to like get online, buy your tickets. That's the kind of ordering of the desire to go out and have fun in the sun. So I would love to hear, I'm kind of just repeating what you said, but bringing that line into it too. And I will be very eager to have someone kind of play out these lines.
Brianne, from your perspective, are we good to continue on this line? It seems fruitful.
Yeah, I think we can go.
Okay. So happy to invite Stephanie. I think you're interested in contributing to this line.
Yeah, I wonder if it will be claimed for is important there in the sentence, because if you look at very bottom of 18 to the top of 19, in any modern nation where there is a clamor about freedom, we usually find different groups of people, each group claiming that freedom relevant to its circumstance of inheritance. I wonder if that's the sense in which he might be referring to freedom in the sentence we were just discussing on page 4. So maybe not his own position, but he's describing how freedom is usually talked about. Hopefully I'm being clear.
Brianne, are you sorry, Brianne, I think you're muted.
I'm talking to myself. I'm just reading out loud because that's how I have to do Whitehead.
Okay, making sure. Thank you, Stephanie, for bringing this one to our attention. I think that the next in the queue is Lydia and then Fala.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this line of inquiry. It's reflecting and helping me to understand my own comment about whiteness in the nursery and the complexity of going to the child for presentational immediacy when the sensibility of the family and the training of the child into the family structures of order is met with nostalgia from later in life. And so the violence of early childhood education is what's occurring to me in this relationship between freedom and order in the mind of the child.
That links us back to his works on education and his view about romance and the value he placed on his early experiences, which were largely, if I'm remembering correctly, he felt largely unordered in a good way that he was able to explore. And it wasn't that he was pushed to do precision or generalization too quickly. And so I'm seeing lots of connections with what he's saying here to what he says about education, again, as others have noted. Does that sound right, Lydia? Are you
What
agreeing,
I'm
or am I
actually seeing
disagreeing
is
with you?
that that freedom that he's waxing on about actually reflects a great deal of violence from white masculine family structures, Victorian sensibilities that are being coded into the child at a level that is somewhere that he's not consciously reflecting about. So I'm seeing an encoding that's confusing, a part of the confusion of the issue.
Thanks. That helps clarify. Apologies for directing us in the way you were not intending. I appreciate the clarification. That sounds like a good article to write too. All right, so that's on your assignment.
Brian, I see that Maynard Moore has a hand up as well, actual hand as opposed to a digital one.
Okay, I'll take Fala and then Maynard. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here again in this group to reflect on Whitehead's works. I'm really interested in reacting to Joe's point, the relationship between order and humor, and he makes that of page 4. It is evident that order will be closely associated with the prevalent humor of the society concerned, and the freedom will be claimed for the prevalent scatter of its wit. When I read that, I also felt it was like kind of interchanged. But when I read further in there and reflecting on the questions that were given for our for guide, the very first question, which was, is there a sentence that captures the heart of this essay? I got to page 11, where he talks of democracy is being impossible except with a large harmony of such humors. I think that part made me to reaffirm that he didn't make a mistake there. He didn't interchange anything. And the sense, what he meant by order, I would like to link it to his other works when he talks of nature. Nature is like order for him, is a natural order in a way, but nature could be synonymous to order. And humor is more of something that is embedded in human nature. In that light, we see that freedom is kind of the sense in which freedom is used is some sort of freedom is some new creation, is some is something which is witty. That is, we can only be free in his context if we have some we start rationalizing. So it's like freedom is a product of rationalization. That was my perspective, and I was like, his discourse here is much more very linked to democracy and politics of his time. And maybe Joe could help us to understand the context of this text, taking into consideration the political situations of the 1940s and 1950s. Between that period, what were the trends? What was happening in the world? Because I am very convinced Whitehead always wrote in deep connection with his society. He was always in touch with what was happening in his society at that time. So what was really the issue of this essay? Thank you.
Joe, you've been called out. Late 30s, early 40s in Europe and America. It's hard because we don't know the date of this essay, and we don't know the audience to which he was directing it. We know from last session when he was presenting to the Augustinians that his audience made a big difference to what he was saying, but we don't know who his audience was here. Joe, are we even convinced that this was orally delivered? I'm not sure that, do we even know that it was in fact delivered orally somewhere?
We don't actually know that for sure. There seems to be every indication that it was. It's sort of pitched that way. But as you say, I mean, in some ways, I can't really go much into the context because we just can't be sure when it was written. But it seems safe to assume that it was probably somewhere around the beginning of World War II. And, you know, he certainly had one of his sons die in the First World War. And also his other son, North, was very much involved in the Second World War. He was in British intelligence. So, you know, but other than that, I don't know that I could say much else off the cuff.
The passages here remind us, at least mind me, of Adventures of Ideas, in 1933, and similar themes are there. But we're neglecting Maynard. Maynard, did you still have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what Stephanie was saying. I was trying to raise my hand through the Q&A participants, but I couldn't get a response. So by the time I got my hand raised, we were 3 or 4 comments further on. I read this yesterday fully for the first time, and the only way the only way that I can understand Whitehead is to chart what he is saying. I went to Perkins School of Theology and studied with Schubert Ogden, and encountered Whitehead, and then I did my doctoral work at the University of Chicago, where the influence of Charles Hartshorne was still very strong. I fully appreciate the interplay of the terms that Whitehead uses. Same with Hartshorne. So when I went back to this early this morning, I started to chart the terms, and I made 2 columns, freedom and order, which are contrasted in this this essay, and got into it, of course, with wit and humor. And at first I put wit under freedom to the left and humor to the right. But the more I read it, I switched those terms. And so now I've got humor on the left under freedom and wit under order. I hope you can help me clarify that is more appropriate. I'm also concerned about the contrast that he draws between ethics and aesthetics. I'm sure, Stephanie, I think you mentioned that. I'm not sure if it was you or not now. There are 3 or 4 comments that have emerged in between. But anyway, somebody did. And now I've got aesthetics on the left under freedom and ethics on the right under order. And I'm trying to see all the other terms that he has used in contrast and trying to figure out where things fit. So I just wanted to raise the question about, let's say, wit and humor. Do I have those placed correctly? Joe, perhaps you or Brianna can help me sort that out, and then I can proceed from there.
I have an idea before Brianne and Joe comment on that. We can try doing something really quick just to get a sense of the room. So I'm going to post a question in the chat, and what I'd like you to do is use your reaction buttons if you're able to, and you're going to answer the question by either clicking in the reactions. You're either going to click yes, which is the green circle, or no, which is the red circle. If I formulated the question correctly, Maynard should get information about what people in the room think about how to align these. So here's the question in the chat. Do you see Whitehead as aligning wit with freedom or wit with order? By implication, Maynard, that would give you the other side as well. So I'm going to then frame it as a yes/no question, right? So is wit aligned with freedom? So answer that yes or no with your reactions, and that'll give us a tally. If you don't know, don't feel like you have to answer. Is wit aligned with freedom? Yes or no? So I'll give people a second here. We'll do philosophy voting. I don't know. This is great. So couple knows, but we've got, and now the social dynamic kicks in, and people are not so confident in themselves in it. So we're getting mostly yeses, Maynard. There were a couple no's initially. And so it was more like at the peak, it was more like a 7-2 with yes.
Brian, I think this ties in a bit to our next question as well. So maybe we can keep it, keep it up very much alive.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I wanted to just, I'm going to also take a moment for my own vector prerogative. I have the same thing. I actually, Joe, I don't know how we take this idea of like mapping these terms in this. I just really like this. So, I think that there's something really helpful about Maynard's suggestion. But I wanted to just look at the bottom of 11 and 12, and then we'll, just as among humans, can you guys see this? Are you guys seeing? Okay, among humans, there is no such thing as pure humor. There is always an intermixture of wit, producing some grade of imagination. Human beings are imaginative with a large variety of grading. It is wit that produces the suggestion of novelty, consciously entered upon. Thus, wit preserves society amid novel dangers. Wit produces progress. Wit destroys a social system by ill-judged change. So, I mean, I'm always trying to think about this like in the present, and I think, we'll just kind of continue this after our next question round, but I keep thinking like, is humor, like think about our present moment with this pandemic and all this infighting and anger, and I just keep thinking, is humor the sort of like almost the kind of positive conservatism that says we don't want to just blow society all to hell, and then wit is the part that's kind of fused to the present moment, just this like kind of popcorn of critique and novelty and new connections. Like that's how I'm kind of trying to think of it. It's kind of a needful but possibly a stagnant conservatism that is then punctuated with wit to bring novelty, but you're wanting to find that balance, because then wouldn't that seem to lead into this idea of imagination and religion as aimed towards something? Like we're not trying to blow it all to smithereens. We're trying to gradually expand, or maybe sometimes not gradually expand, what the occasion of society can hold, right? How much difference and tension can society hold? So I don't know if that's in the right vein, but I'm kind of with Maynard. Like I just want to have someone say like, yeah, or no. I'm not thinking it right. So with a pause on that, I want to go to our next question, and you all can pick this up or pick up anything else you want. I'm going to share screen. Our next question is twofold. We've got two options. All right. So I want you to choose one of the two. You can choose question 2, or you can choose the wild card. If you choose the wild card, I just ask that you put the WC in front of it so we know that's what you're doing. Here's question 2. Can you articulate a relation between different pairings in this essay, such as good, beautiful, wit, humor, freedom, order, ethics, aesthetics? It's really what Maynard was just trying to get to. And so it's an opportunity for us to think through that. And then we've got the wild card. So I'm going to put a timer on for 3.5 minutes. That'll bring us right to 10 a.m., giving us a half hour for this second round. 3.5 minutes. Go ahead. You're going to enter your answer in the chat, either for question 2 or the wild card. Don't hit enter until I say. And then we'll populate the chat at the same time. 3.5 minutes, choose your question, and see you in a few. All right. We are at time, so as you're ready, you can begin to enter your questions. I really want to, this is my plea. I really don't want to lose sight of the early part of the questions that were raised in terms of the danger. I really want to make sure we're touching a little bit of where is the danger coming in. And I also want to make sure that we're trying, at least before we end, to fit in this concept of religion. Like, what is the aim? What is this? You know, it's the ideal and the aim at the ideal, right? So how does that fit in, right? Obviously, I think Whitehead is trying to push towards some kind of aesthetic, ethical vision and want to not lose sight of that particular thread. Okay, so if we go into our chat, let me unshare and find you all again. Where have you gone? All right. There's me, there's my questions. Okay, Eric is saying, wit and humor do indeed pair with freedom and order respectively. So let's just, that would be wit with freedom, humor with order. That's also how I'm seeing it. Freedom in Whitehead's meaning can, I think, perhaps better be translated as chaos, using the old dichotomy of chaos and order. Order is a reliable society, which would mean then humor is sort of in there, then humor, right? It's largely consistent. Its members know what to expect. Chaos or freedom is revolution, or at least radical action. So as Brianne postulated, order coming from society's majority sense of oneness produces stability. And the accompanying security is, I think, happiness for Whitehead. However, he realizes the need for voices of change, if for no other reason than they create innovation. Yeah, I'm just wondering about when you go to a comedy show, right? Does humor require a kind of common understanding, right? That we can laugh at the past. We have a sense of where we're located in time and with all of its flaws, and then wit is something slightly different. Damien is saying construction, destruction, novel, reconstruction. Damien, you should weigh in at some point to kind of maybe give a little context to that if you'd like. Ryan is asking a wild card on page 17. All expression of the ideal aim is termed propaganda. The world is reduced to the commonplace mitigated by journalistic headlines. So Brian, is that like a question you want people to take up? Just thumbs up? Or you want to say something on it? Okay, let's not lose sight of that one. Lynn de Jong, I think these paired qualities are exemplary of Whitehead's dialectical thinking. Yeah, creativity creates the synthesis, the desired level of freedom, the balance between the concepts he is contrasting. Miriam says, to go back to my first quote, Whitehead perhaps asks how morality became universal, and the severe consequences of that cleavage from ethics and aesthetics. It's a great question with consequences for how we decide to answer. Jessica, this humor plus wit equals imagination makes me think of the last session's essay where cold ideas are best functioning when funding warm emotions, are funding actions. So a process-oriented relationship. Here I think I see the same. The deep swells of humor need a pepper salting of wit to go on the holiday adventure. You need the desire, humor, for it, plus the ability, the freedom or the wit to book the boat tickets. Oh, it's hurting my face, you guys. I can't. Oh, okay. And Maynard Moore is saying, yes, the only way I can understand Whitehead is to try to articulate this relation, but even so, it gets confusing. Yes, as I pointed out, wit suggests novelty. I have been thinking the opposite. Human allows for the emergence of novelty, while wit produces the social order that allows for the emergence of novelty. The same with aesthetics and ethics. Ethics aligned with wit. Now, so we'll keep wrestling with this. A couple more, and then we'll take a pause. Rudiger is saying, think humor is the cynical acceptance, wit is rebellion. So cynical, that's the question I wonder. Is it the cynical acceptance? All right, you guys take this up. And Adrian is saying, oh man, my brain. Okay. I can't, Adrian. You've got to read this. It's too much. All right, you guys, hands raised. You can take up any of these, and then I'll try to also weave in Bonnie, Juan, Benjamin in a little bit. Let's just get started on this, and we've got 25 minutes. Hands up, hearts up, faces up. Brian, take over.
Damien, please.
Okay, so as I understand this, one of his earlier statements was that humor is early consciousness, wit is latter consciousness. So per my little comment about construction, deconstruction, novel reconstruction, I see humor as sticking its elbow in the ribs of the moment, as sort of a deconstruction, and then wit takes what falls apart and puts it back in an interesting new way. Simple as that.
Thanks for getting us started. You know, it occurs to me that I would recommend next time we get together, it'll be really fun to have us start off by saying where we are. That would be fun just to get a sense. Damien, where are you coming from? Just out of curiosity, where in the world are you?
I'm in Claremont, so I'm like in the center of process thought. You know, when John Cobb lives down the street from you, you get this in the air, you know.
It's like you're supposed to double mask for that.
Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Damien.
I mean, so was that humor or was that wit, Brian? Seriously,
honestly,
like
I have not.
we all laughed,
glad
but
you
what
all,
was it?
You all have been helping me with these terms. I did not make a whole lot of sense of wit and humor. I just found the contrast utterly confounding. So that's where I am on the two. I'm having a lot of trouble locating it within the rest of his work. So this has been a helpful conversation. I loved his discussions of ideals at the end. I'll take a little prerogative to keep us moving here. I pointed to the passage on 17 about the expression of ideal aim, term propaganda. I take his work really to be a lot, especially as it gets close to ethics and aesthetics, to be talking about formulating ideals that move us forward and resisting morality that codifies, ossifies, and becomes an impediment to progress. And so it's this tension between formulating ideals, but then, you know, fallibilistically reformulating them and letting them pull us forward, and the relationship of that to ethics. So when I was thinking about if this was written in the 30s or 40s, there was this fight, continental fight over ideas between different groups in the world over different ideals, different visions of between things were going on in Germany, things were going on in Russia, things were going on in the continent and in North America. And so all of those ideals were termed propaganda. And then I think of today, where we've got lots of fights over, you know, Black Lives Matter is propaganda. And you've got these sort of fight over ideals that then gets sort of, as it's filtered through, as he puts it, our journalistic headlines, it becomes mundane. It becomes sort of, it loses the sort of, frequently loses the vigor. It just becomes fights over propaganda. I don't know. That was what I was thinking of. That's not well formulated, but that's what was provoking me at the moment. Fala, where in the world are you coming from, and what is your thought about this last question we've got?
I'm from Cameroon, but presently I'm in Rome, in Italy. So, I don't have something to say about this, but I have a question which is bothering me. Some feeling which I have is trying to discover what this AC was all about. That's going back to the question that the very first question which was proposed. That's the sentence or the meaning of this AC. Could that not help us to clarify what in this contrast with humor, could trying to figure out that not help us to clarify what Whitehead really means by wit in this context, and maybe not going out too much to other things. That's
to clarify,
Fala,
are you saying if we could clarify when it was delivered? Or
no,
to whom it was delivered?
The problematic, the question that Whitehead is addressing in this paper. What is he talking about? What problem is he trying to address in this article or in this publication? What is he really talking? It could help us to give to understand what he means by humor and what he means by wit. Else, we may be confused. We may be thinking he's understanding wit in our present situation, whereas it's not a situation. Or it could, I think that could help us to clarify, to understand these contrasts that he makes. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I suspect that would be a big, good task that we would probably arrive at different answers to because, philosophy. But it's a good interpretive lens. And then a second lens would be to bring in, and then how does it relate to what else is written and what we know, and how does that help us to try and answer it. So I think you're right that would be a good approach. I think it'd be hard to do because I don't think we have enough decisively here, but I could be wrong about that. Let's see, other hands.
I think Follow was just saying that, in order to get at this distinction between wit and humor, we need to just try and figure out what kind of the main point of the whole essay is, which I think I would agree with. But as he was talking, it made me think that the very beginning, literally the first sentence of this was, "Let it be understood at once that the freedom mentioned in the title belongs primarily to the author, who will ramble freely over types and instances of order which have caught his attention," which is to say, the main point of this does seem like actually kind of a difficult thing to nail down. He kind of does kind of ramble and meander a lot, and
that was kind of my point, was that I
Yeah.
don't think we would agree on what his point is, and he's pretty clear that it kind of reminds me of what somebody like an old person would do at the end of their life, and they're like, I'm just gonna this is what I think today. Kids these days, and there's quite a bit of that going on in there too. But so saying what his point is would be a good philosophical project, but I don't think it'd be easy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last essay was very focused, and everyone could, for the most part, tell what the main points of that were, and this one's maybe a little bit harder. But anyway, I see hands being raised, so.
Eric.
Thank you. If I may just put in one possible thought on this topic. I really, at the end of the day, read this essay as a support of as a supportive document of the Liberal Party and an absolute centrist political stance. In that, and I do believe that this was probably written in the interwar years. He refers to Holland as being free, and he refers to Germany as central Germany as being, let's say, problematic, but with nothing decided. So it either has to be, in my mind, either interwar years or after the war's over. And I do think that it's largely a political essay where he's bolstering a strength of a very centrist viewpoint, and calling for, as he seems to do throughout his work, a return, and this is where he sums up essentially, a return to an ethic that embraces the idea of of an ideal good, which, particularly in the interwar years was, as I think has already been pointed out, was definitely not on the horizon, which just wasn't present. So and that's where I see the real point of this essay.
That's helpful, Eric. I should have asked, where are you coming from?
Oh, I'm in Boston, actually Brookline, but Boston.
Nice. If Dan Dombrowski was still with us, he was here earlier, who's written on liberalism and Whitehead, and I think he'd agree with you in sort of classical liberal position. I think I might have seen, before I take the next set of hands, I think I might have seen Kevin. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin, please.
I'm sorry, I'm not much of a Zoomer, but, I'm hearing a lot of people, talking polarized sort of ideas. And when I was reading this, one of the things that for me was, I remember the line from William Carlos Williams. And he said, we play the piano, we don't fall into the strings. I think as philosophers, I think we're in the strings. And I think as a poet, I think playing the piano is probably better for him. But I think the metaphor of having, and going to music's kind of cheap. It's a very easy thing to use because it's so profound. But I think when we think about a piano and the strings, and if we think about the possibility of the language of music, this would be something that I would call order. And I won't call it humor yet, but call it order. And then if we think about how the person, a witty person sits down, does wonderful things. It seems like religion sometimes. It's a march here, it's a hymn there. You know, that seems to me to be wit, but it's based on the possibilities that the piano and the language of music has. Then if we basically come around to the end of the opera, a profound tragedy, you know, we're talking Mozart laugh here. You know, we're broken. And we look at the whole thing, there's always a feeling for most people who've been around art to see an incredible humor in the tragedy. You talked about it when you said the old crotchety guy, Brian, you talked about it, who would, you know, kind of, you know, say, these kids, they don't know anything. But I think about the old crotchety people sitting in a tent, in a barn. You're not dancing anymore, but looking out as all these people swirl around and form romantic relations. They see the politics, they see all this thing going on here, and there's a huge humor. So we come back around. So the piano and the whole system, the forces, if you would, that all the wit's kind of based on, you know, are humorous. It's a profound joy, profound humor. So I think looking at it in a kind of a way, I mean, even Whitehead at the beginning says, I'm going to ramble. You know, I think that is kind of the best way for me anyway, when I started thinking about all this. So anyway, I'm not much of a Zoomer, and I'm in Portland, by the way, and I will mute myself if I can find the button here.
Are you in Portland, Maine or Portland, Oregon?
Oregon, yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Gotta ask. Good.
Yeah.
Thanks for jumping in, Kevin.
Sure.
Looks like our next hand is from Juan, and then Fala. Juan, where you said you're in Texas, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in El Paso, Texas, really close to the border with Mexico and Ciudad Juarez and New Mexico. So we're the often forgotten child of Texas. I wanted to point out, Brianne earlier mentioned a section in which we talk about this gradient between wit and humor, but also there's another section in, I think it was page 8 and moving into page 9, in which, and I'm summarizing, we can look at the page, but he basically says, look, I mean, I make these distinctions, you know, that humor goes with order and wit goes with freedom, but really don't take me that seriously. These are, don't fall for it too much. So I think here he's being humorous in that sense that he's giving us order, but also he's giving us play. So it kind of contrasts these maybe possible concepts of freedom that they're in contrast. But then he goes into the example of, yeah, the attack of Belgium, particularly the First World War by Germany. And he says, again, summarizing, that before the intellectuals, before the politicians and everybody got together and said that this is attempt to unite against this aggression, he says that the feelings of the people, the humor of the people brought this unity. And to me, I like this example and there's others he mentions because it shows that there's a deep connection between humor and wit and order and freedom. And he emphasizes at different places. But here is, we were united, and I think that quote of "we were united" happens at the end of the example. We were united before we were told to be united. There, exactly, but there was unity, but unity was there long before the men of learning got to work. Okay, and so to me, I mean, he's the way I read the essay, and I can see, you know, the point of being possibly a political essay, but it's also an essay that kind of warns us about creating this dual distinctions. But the important thing I saw, maybe I was reading too much into it, that the key concept is not freedom or order, but rather imagination as the link between the two. And if you lose that, you lose the power of both order and freedom. So instead of opposites, they are connected. And if we lose that throughout, you lose the society, which he then says you need requires an order and stuff like that. So anyway, so it gets complicated, but my contribution to the conversation would be the point of the essay, as I see it, is, you know, focusing on the imagination and the crucial role at all levels, not just at the personal level.
That's a really, I think, perceptive comment, Juan. Thank you for sharing that. I'm reminded as you're talking that what we find in Harvard Lectures 1 and Harvard Lectures 2 is Whitehead experimenting with terminology in the classroom. And Joe and I try and highlight this in the collection of essays we published as well. And what you find there is he's using terms and then they never appear in his published works. And so he's experimenting with his class, with his students, trying to grapple with an idea, and then doesn't like it and doesn't keep using it. He's trying to get at an idea, and as we know, he feels like language is ultimately inadequate. So I just sort of add that. That doesn't really. I mean, I think your comments are, I take it, really spot on in terms of play and not taking too seriously. But I think it's kind of interesting to think of these new terms. Wit and humor don't appear elsewhere, and that's, so it's interesting, right? What to make of these sort of terminological experiments that some of them are fortuitous, and some I think he just sort of like, you know what, that was a dumb idea, but it still is revelatory, I think, of him and his thinking at that moment. So I think it's just a lot of fun to think through this together. So thank you for that. We're getting close to the end. We got at least a good another 5 minutes though. Fala, did you want to jump back in? And I see William might be trying to get in as well. Okay, so.
Oh yes,
maybe.
Sorry for jumping in without your permission, but I would just, I've been maybe jumping in too much this discussion because I find this essay so interesting, and I would like to say appreciate what Eric said, and something that caught my attention is Whitehead mentions democracy just once in this essay. On page 11, he talks of democracy is impossible without a large harmony of such humors. And after that, before and after that, he doesn't mention anything on democracy anymore. And I think he was trying to maybe give us some materials which could help us to construct a better democracy. And Johan will tell me, I think Johan will also go in this light, something of that nature. So I think that point of Whitehead and him mentioning democracy just once, and on page 11, which seems to be the middle part of his essay, is kind of a textual way of looking at the text, but I think it's important, and his take on democracy could heal our world now, because we are actually having many democratic problems almost everywhere in the world. I think this essay could be very relevant to us again. Thank you.
Thanks, Fala. I'm going to take William and then Brianne.
One of the ideas in this essay is ideals spell religion. I've just reduced it to 3 words, but that runs throughout his work. And so this is a deep idea in Whitehead. And religion has thereby become an epistemological and metaphysical and biological and sociological and historical function, rather than something derived from summing up what creedal bodies. So, and then the ideals expressed that embrace the whole tradition. And the tradition isn't just sociological, it's never merely sociological, it's also biological, organic, evolutionary, back to the smallest. So the ideals that embrace that, respect those traditions, therefore humor. Like think of Will Rogers, or another kind of, I had a banjo player in my band, and he would try to keep the band amused at a wedding in front of people. And he would say very inappropriate comments, and it would distract the band. And he thought himself very witty, but I eventually let him go. And it was just intolerable. And so a wit that doesn't respect the tradition, what's going on with everybody, everything at the moment, then you get wit. Sometimes you need the wit because you're ossified. But anyway, just Thank you. He secularizes religion just like he secularizes. We have a lowercase God. This is like a lowercase religion, and it's everywhere all the time. Oh, I wanted to mention about humors. I can't believe he didn't allude to the humorology, the theory of the humors, going back to Hippocrates and Galen and those folks. And these are stances, emotional stances that obtain through vast segments of the population of the cosmos. Anyway, I don't know what to make of that, but there it is. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, it's sort of present absence if you didn't make a connection. Yeah, Brianne, do you want to have the last word before we talk about next session?
Yeah, I'd love to. I was just thinking, you know, and I think this fits well with what Bill just said. On page 1819, it says, Whitehead says, freedom for one group means constraint for another group. And I think, you know, that just, I think when we think socially, that's a really helpful way of thinking that as we're, you know, pushing for positive rights, as we push for a kind of ideal society, well, we think all people should have access to a laptop, right? I mean, we live kind of in a negative rights society because we recognize that the more we put forth a vision of what we think the ideal is, the more that freedom will run roughshod over people who disagree. I mean, it's kind of the perpetual problem of liberalism. And so Bill just made this point that wit was necessary. Sometimes it's helpful because we're ossified, but wit can also be offensive. And it can go too much against the grain of what's acceptable. And it feels like so much, I mean, Whitehead must have felt very much in that time, and here we are feeling very much in that time. But so it goes on, 1819, you can find it, Brian, here. Freedom for one group means constraint for another group. The decision must lie in an examination of the more permanent character of the nation and of the type of variation possible for it. Like, again, I can't help but think about Bernard Loomer's, like, how much can the actual occasion hold without being thrown or broke, right? How much dissonance can you allow into the symphony without it exploding? How many different characters can you invite into the party, political or personal, right? Without the party going to hell. It's this sort of slow movement toward widening the event of society, right? To allow for greater dissonance without being broken apart. And here it seems to me that the question of religion becomes on page 20, right? The question of the moral ideal, 20. Surely the moral ideal is the aim at the ideal experience relevant to the particular circumstances in question, right? So given the situation, given the current society, what is the ideal that's relevant to this? How far can we push this? How much can we expand this event, this society, without blowing it apart? And then he's challenging, I think, this is my last thought here, he brings up Plato, the fusion of the good with the beautiful, right? The ideal, again, the inaccessible ideal, the non-material ideal. And what is the content of that ideal? I mean, now I think about when he says it's all the more important that we care for our abstractions, right? Because what is the ideal? The ideal can either close society down, or it can, or destroy it, blow it apart, or it can open it up. And he says, in referencing Adam Smith at the very end, that the good and the beautiful has maybe been replaced by good and economic success. That our ideal of the beautiful has become co-opted in this economic terms, and that we need to reclaim some kind of religious vision of the beautiful, of some kind of expansive event, some kind of, which he says maybe only can happen in the kingdom of heaven. I don't think he's meaning that like in the streets paved with gold. He means in this Platonic sense of an ideal that isn't limited to the bodily constraints that we have within society, right? How do we allow this beautiful ideal of an expansive event to enfold into our becoming, right? Not have some shallow ideal of economic success that will never really push a society into a closer proximity to the vision of the beautiful, or the kingdom of heaven, as it were. All right, those are my last thoughts. Yes.
We better leave it there. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you
Brianne.
all.
We're a little bit past time. That was a really lovely way to end. Thank you so much for that. I'll just remind everybody that we're going to meet again if you're interested. We've got 3 letters from Birch and Russell, which are actually at McMaster's, where Russell's archives are located, and they are letting us sort of focus our next discussion on those. So consider taking a look at those, and we'll be announcing what readings will be coming after that.
Yep.
Anything else, Brianne?
Yeah, from my side, just as we've been doing in the next week, look for an email from us. We'll have a link to today's video. We'll have a couple questions to have you thinking about our next reading. Joe, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say really quickly about the next reading, that kind of the hook for it, or I guess the reason you should be interested in these letters, is that these are 1911 letters to Bertrand Russell, in which Russell had sent Whitehead his manuscript for his book, The Problems of Philosophy. And it's Whitehead responding, commenting on Russell's book. And the interesting thing about it is that he is making these comments on Russell's philosophy before he was doing philosophy professionally himself. So it's really kind of the earliest philosophy we have from him. So I'll be interested to see what people think in terms of what this shows about his philosophical development and impetus. So it should be interesting.
Great. All right. Well, you all know where to find us. You can connect with us if you've got any questions. In the meantime, we'll see you in 3 weeks. Thanks so much. Take care of yourself.